Hey everybody, welcome back to Ready Steady Podcast, the Ready Steady Play podcast about board games. We're going to be talking about board games and the board games we've been playing and the board games we've been looking at. As usual, I'm joined by Barry. How you doing, Barry?
I'm fine, just getting over this con flu. Nearly at the end, on the mend.
I narrowly managed to avoid it somehow. Unknown.
Despite all the different people you were touching.
Yep, long may this kind of perseverance continue.
So all that extra shredded wheat you've been eating.
Exactly right.
Other cereal brands are available.
We are not sponsored
Yeah.
by shredded wheats. But we could be.
We could be.
You want to pay us money. And if you're watching this on YouTube or on Spotify, you might have observed here on the video side of things that I've got a few Earthborn Rangers stuff on the table here because I was playing it and I haven't put it away because I want to get back to playing it as soon as possible. I'm almost done The Lure of the Valley, Barry. Did you know what that is?
I've known many valleys which are lured me in. However, I'm not sure of your particular one.
Barry's like, I know the emotion.
Yeah. Why sometimes I'm at the top of a hill and I'm like, I just need to get down to the bottom, you know?
So the Lure of the Valley is the main campaign that comes in the base game box of Earthborn Rangers. And this is a review copy that I got from Earthborn Games. And I've been playing through the campaign. I actually started playing it because I was going to live stream it. And I was like, I need to get my head around the rules and the flow of the game. And so that when I'm on the live stream, you know, I can present it reasonably well. And I thought I'd restart it as well. So I set up a character, I built the starting deck, and I was like, I'm going to change up who I'm going to be once I start live streaming it. So I won't put too much thought into this. And now I'm almost done the main campaign with that character. And I'm having a lovely time. And I'm going to talk about my thoughts in a lot more detail in a review coming to the YouTube channel. So
nice.
If you want to hear more about that, come and subscribe.
Perhaps I will.
He hasn't yet, but he's still considering it. He's on the fence, but...
No, like, I don't know. Yeah, you got some people in there that just not worth watching.
We're close to winning him over, folks. We'll get him in the end. All right, we're gonna cover off the news. There's going to be a few things we've seen coming up, things that we like the look of, or are curious about, or perhaps are not so impressed with. But we've got a few titles here, a few things that are live on crowdfunding at the moment, and a few upcoming releases, and a few things that I saw at the UKG that I forgot to mention in the last episode.
Oh, whoopsie!
Then after that, we'll move on to the played section, where we'll talk through the games we've been playing and what we think about them. And so kicking off first, I just want to issue really kind of an apology because I said I really wanted to get Merchants of the Dark Road to the table. I have the original deluxe edition of the game, and there is an expansion currently crowdfunding. If you're listening to this podcast on the day it came out, there's 2 days left on crowdfunding for that, and I will not be able to talk about it because I've not yet managed to play it. Possibly I got too distracted by Earthborn Rangers. I would not jump all in on this game, on this campaign. But I think if you've got it and you've played it and you like it, then, you know, check out the expansion. Looks like it offers more mechanisms, a little bit more bells and whistles, levers to pull. Nothing sort of majorly revolutionary. And I think the other thing is the original deluxe edition of this game, the production of that was off the charts. I mean, I think the production is largely the reason why this is still getting an expansion. You know, the production is just gorgeous. And if you need the deluxe expansion to go with your deluxe edition, this is possibly the best way to get it. I don't know how many of those will be available at retail in the future. If it is like the original campaign, though, probably quite a lot, because there'll be a lot of leftover stock.
I do vaguely remember seeing a lot of them going on sale.
Unfortunately, I can't add any more value than that because I haven't actually played the game. I know it's been very sort of polarizing, and it might be quite telling that even after all of this, I still haven't actually managed to play it. We've got Ada's Dream. Have you played it?
No, so that was at the expo, and it was on my list for games to play. Looks quite interesting, I thought. So the only opportunity, though, that I had to get near the game was when the stand was empty. And there wasn't even anybody there to teach me. So I pushed a little bits around, but that's not really playing.
Yeah, I spoke to a friend of mine who went to take a look at it at the UKG, and they were quite interested in it. Euro games are definitely their sort of thing, and Euro puzzles as well, and they're quite intrigued by the mechanisms. So this is obviously based on Ada Lovelace, and from what I understand about computer technology history, which is extremely limited and could be incorrect. So this is my own fact-checking warning here. This is unfact-checked, could be completely wrong. Ada Lovelace had the idea for a computer long before the actual computer manifested. So that's, I think, the idea of Ada's Dream is the machine she originally envisaged years before, I think it was Babbage went out and created an actual computer, yeah.
It's alternate history Eurogame.
Right. So is the premise of this game that you're actually developing Ada's machine?
Yeah, you're building. You're helping her fulfill her dream of building the computer. Therefore, Ada's Dream. So you got to collect the blueprints and put the all together, as far as I could tell, on the boards and engine building type game. But as I said, I never actually got a chance to play proper. So
what I understand is that there is rows on your player board which will be sort of doing some kind of engine building thing, and there are dice locked in. Dice is dice?
There's definitely some dice to be chucked.
Yeah, I don't know if they're chucked or if they're just used as counters, but they're locked into your player board, and triggering different things will cause those dice to be manipulated in different ways. And so that's sort of, I think, the core puzzle is how you arrange the dice to be triggered to produce the goods, right?
Gotcha. Yeah, the dice are in like a rondel, and I presume you do something to move certain colours or numbers into certain areas to use them.
There we go. So that's live on crowdfunding right now. It is from Alley Cat Games, and you can go check out that campaign if you want to know a little bit more. That'd be one I might be interested in playing with the patrons, actually. How long is left on that, Barry?
21 days. Boom. Nailed it. Of course, when this comes out, 14 days.
14 days. All right. We've got the Terraria campaign up and running. Did you ever play Terraria, Barry?
Yeah, I played a little bit. Like, I never got all the way to the dug down to the depths and defeated the final boss or anything, but I did spend a little time making a hut above ground and then getting stomped in the evening when I forgot to shut the door and all the beasties came in. But so I've never been big into it. However, I was aware of it, and I do own it. But then again, if we go by the amount of games that I own on Steam, I never get anything else done.
Yeah, I've never played Terraria at all. It looked like 2D Minecraft.
That is, in part, a way how it was originally described. I think it's very much its own thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, like you're digging for resources and building. It's similar enough to Minecraft in terms of how it does survival. But I don't know what the board game focuses on, or how to make it fun in sort of a 2-hour window, because you can spend half your life playing a single game.
Well, I can tell you quite a lot about this, actually, because I got to have a look at the prototype and see some of the mechanisms. So it is a cooperative game, and its core focus is on completing these objectives. So you've got these objective stacks, and obviously this is a snapshot in time when it was live on Kickstarter. I don't know if this is what the final game is going to look like, but you've effectively got these stacks of objectives, and you have to get to I think there's 5 stacks, or it could be 4. 4 or 5 stacks, and you have to get to the bottom of 2 or 3 of them.
Mm-hmm.
And they start off dead easy. So, like the first objective will be like mine a dirt block, right? And then when you get down to the last one, they're going to be much more significant goals. And so you have to complete those. There's a separate objective, just a one-off, which is defeat the final boss.
Mm-hmm.
And you can do that instead. So if you defeat the final boss, you can ignore all the other objectives and you don't need to worry about them. So you either work your way through the stacks or you do that. And that's how you win the game. Now, how long the actual game takes to play, I don't know. Paperfork Games indicated that they would like it to be sort of 2 hours.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's reasonable expectation. We'll have to see what things look like in the final. Of course, it does still have the elements of finding the different biomes, and they come up with quite an interesting way of sort of discovering the world. So there's this sort of idea of, if you've played Terraria, you'll know this better than me, but there are these different biomes above ground, and then below ground is loads of dirt.
Yep.
But you get different monsters living in the different biomes. You might need to go and hunt them and things like that. So there's reasons to explore these different above ground areas, even though the whole underground is all the same.
Yeah.
And what you'll do is you'll randomly, so you've got this sort of like linear tracker, which goes side to side in the board game, and you'll randomly seed different biomes along the tracker. So you always start in the woods. This is the easy biome. And so that one starts face up. And then you have 2 more biomes on either side. I think there's 5 in total, I think. So you'll have 2 on either side of you. And then you'll flip, and each biome is like 3 cards. So the world you're building is going to be cards, and it goes like 3 cards up. So you have this grid of 9 cards. That's your sort of starting above ground biome. 3 cards up, 3 cards along. And then it goes down by like 5 or 6 cards. Again, all numbers, possibly very wrong. But it goes
There's five down yet.
Yeah, about 5 down, right? So it goes 5 down, and then you can go side to side. When you move off of the card on the left or right of the biome you're currently in, you'll flip the little token on the board, and that will show you the new biome that you're going to lay out. So you'll lay out the 9 cards in that biome, and possibly 1 layer of underground, I think. And the rest of the cards will be sort of populated as you move around and continue to explore. There's also creatures that live in the biomes, and they'll have rudimentary AI, and you'll be flipping those up and putting them onto the board as well. And then if they are within a certain range of your character, they will activate and come at you. But the core mechanism of the game is actually deck building. And it is the Clank school of deck building. So you'll draw 5 cards, play them out on the table, count up all your symbols, and that's how many things you get to do. And there are characters you can entice to come and live in your house who will take cards out of your deck, put better cards in your deck. And there are other things, I think things you can craft in the game that will let you put better cards in your deck. So it's fundamentally a deck building game, actually, with this sort of major geometric map puzzle going on at the same time.
Well, I do love a deck builder. Was it a good method of getting across?
So it's a cooperative game, and I presume it can be played solo. I don't know about true solo, but certainly solo. And for those who don't know, true solo means, where you just have one character. You're not sort of playing as 2 players by yourself. You obviously need some system for action selection, action management, and I do like deck building as well. I don't know how much scope there is to sort of, I don't even know in Terraria if you have different classes or different races or different species, or if you're just, Steve from Minecraft.
Yeah, I think you just start as one person, and you can, you can upgrade yourself in different ways, and your different equipment and your minions.
Yeah, so I guess the point I'm getting at is that I don't know how much scope there will be to sort of specialize decks or become a different kind of sort of do build your deck so you become really good at digging or chopping trees or something like that. Or maybe it's just like strictly all the cards are better, and if you can upgrade one, you want to do it. So then it's less about sort of combo building or tailoring your deck, and more about just how do you access those better, more efficient action cards and ditch the bad ones. Ideally, the game would have an element of both, but
Yeah.
I have not seen enough to know if it has that.
Oh well, that'll still be available. You might only have a day left by the time you see this podcast or hear this podcast.
Yeah, but I'm confident there will be late pledges available. I mean, there usually is for all of these things, but for Terraria, I'm pretty confident there will be. Right. The next one is one that you saw that I know nothing about.
Give me a clue. What one are we talking about here? The Apothebakery. Yeah. So I've seen that a few times on the Tiki Talks. Mike's not down with the Ute the same way I am. So Apothebakery is the first game from Lux Lupo Games. First time Kickstarter. First publication as far as Board Game Geek tells me. And this game is about you as a alchemist baker, I think. And you are going to spend your time collecting ingredients to bake into potions and cakes, right, which is where the bakery part comes in, which you'll then use to heal adventurers and gain points. So you can gather little creatures to help you collect ingredients and valuable resources, and then you're going to spend some time making your potions and baking your cakes, and then there's like a row of places to travel to, and then there's different adventurers, and the more damaged the adventurers are when you heal them, the more points you get. And it looks very pretty. So if Mike can throw a picture up here if you're on YouTube or Spotify. The game looks very nice, like people comparing it as a Flamecraft killer to some degree, because it doesn't look the same, but it's got that cutesy cartoony type look, and you've got to run your little it's not a forge, oven, I guess, with your alchemical
your bread forge.
Yeah, but you've got like a still with all your potions brewing and stuff around it as well. You got to run the heat and the flames to bake the right kind of ingredients, and sometimes you can mess it up, and you don't quite know what the outcome's going to be for when you feed it to an adventurer. And it looks fun, but I believe it was at the expo, but I didn't see it. So it's on Kickstarter just now, and it should still be live when people hear this. You go foraging, then you do your alchemy, and then you heal people, and that's kind of the process. But the act of getting the ingredients and the potential for messing up your brewing or baking is where some of the push your luck kind of elements lie. And it's very, very cute.
The last one on our list here is Grimcoven, which is the big new Awaken Realms one. Grimcoven will have about a week left on it when you're hearing this, if you're listening to it the day it came out. And it is a cooperative boss battler. And it looks very much like it was inspired by Bloodborne. It is Gothic Victorian England or Europe, and it's got these characters called Hunters. I think they're called Hunters, which is actually what they're called in Bloodborne, I think.
Nope. But it's worth noting that Grimcoven is certainly different and legally distinct from Bloodborne.
In all the ways that matter on the legal paper. But yeah, I mean, you've got, so you are effectively hunters who have taken some part in something called the Coven, which requires you to accept corruption onto you and then you will fight until you are dead to defeat evil. And possibly you will become evil before you will die, and then you will have to fight your fallen brethren. And now I've never played Bloodborne, but even I know enough about Bloodborne to know that that's strikingly similar, which is pretty amazing. So I don't know if they were just sad they didn't get the Bloodborne IP, or if they had it and lost it and had to do their own thing. But
Well, Bloodborne already has a board game, right?
Yeah, sure, but the thing, there can be two things.
There certainly can.
There's a Evil Dead the board game and Evil Dead 2. Evil Dead 2 the board game and Evil Dead 2 1%.
True.
There's Resident Evil the card game and Resident Evil the board game. But I don't know why there are such similarities. But or if they just set about creating their own world inspired by Bloodborne, if that was their thing. We were looking at the offering. There is a base set, which is only... So if you know nothing about Awaken Realms, which would be surprising to me because they're such a big part of this industry now, but they are a Kickstarter company. They are a company that uses crowdfunding to fund and distribute almost all of their games. They have been that way since Nemesis. They are the company that created GameFound in order to create a better platform for this. They own GameFound. It is kind of amazing they still find time to make games, but
A different team.
Give it, yeah. Well, I imagine it's an entirely different team, but companies all owned by the same people anyway. In any case, that's kind of by the by. They create huge Kickstarters with enormous amounts of content and tons of plastic miniatures and cards and things like that. Very dense hobby offerings. They're more often than not these days campaign games, but they're not always campaign games. They had an offshoot called Awaken Realms Light that did sort of lighter, more accessible games for a little while, but they haven't been putting out anything too much recently. And I'm not sure if they're still going to continue with that. But the Grimcoven is the sort of the latest one in a large, in their large box offerings. Before this they did Stalker. They did. They've just delivered on the latest Tainted Grail, which is called Kings of Ruin, which is supposed to be a sort of lighter, more streamlined version of that. So, and they actually after Stalker, before this, they did Dragon's Eclipse, I want to say, which was like a sort of, which looked a lot like sort of what if all Pokemon were dragons and it was a board game, which was sort of interesting. I was reasonably intrigued by that, but I found a lot of their offerings to be more bloat than they're worth. By the time I've sort of audited the content and paid the price of entry, I've not found the meat to be particularly worth it, which is a real pity because, I was a big fan of their early games. The Edge Dawnfall, I still think is a great skirmish game. This War of Mine I thought was a really important offering, but that was largely due to the setting rather than and the the board game implementation. I spoke about that in a Final Thoughts a long time ago. You can go see that. There's a few videos talking about that and why it's important. And then their third game, of course, was Nemesis, and when that came out, it sort of hit right for us. We really, really liked it, and I still enjoy playing Nemesis. But I've played about halfway through almost, or not, maybe not halfway through ISS Vanguard, but I've played a reasonable percentage of most of their campaign games, and they've all kind of fallen off, and I keep meaning to go back to them, but
you can't make me.
Well, I can't make you come back to ISS Vanguard. No, I've relieved you of that burden. I will probably continue it alone at some stage, maybe. But the reality is, I don't feel any great desire to do so. and I've not found that the narrative or the plot or even the game mechanisms, I've found holistically none of them are compelling enough, and individually not one of them is compelling enough to bring me back to it. Now, the only exception is Tainted Grail, which I actually would have been quite keen to continue, albeit despite the fact that since we started it, everyone says it becomes incredibly grindy, and they have since released revised rules to make it much less grindy. But that was a world that, and I've spoken about my love of sort of the Arthurian legend and all that kind of stuff. So that was a world that really quite appealed to me. But, you know, I'm also a big fan of Mass Effect and space opera and all that kind of stuff. Grand space sort of stories, you know, in the vein of The Culture or something like that. But the ISS Vanguard still hasn't really grabbed me, you know, and the world that they've created has not yet sunk its teeth into me. And we did 8 chapters, so yeah. And then Etherfields is
I definitely, the only game I played, obviously, Vanguard with you. I played the video game, Tainted Grail, which was I liked, but I don't think it's anything like the board game.
It did start off quite like the board game and then rapidly deviated.
Right.
And, you know, I was in alpha testing on that. And it was very briefly quite similar. Although I don't think it was ever intended to tell the same sort of story. Or the same story that you get in Tainted Grail. Then they did the Great Wall, which I was sort of cautiously optimistic about because I played the prototype and I had some issues with it. And they very kindly sent me a review copy of the Great Wall, which I managed to get to the table with 3 players. And I actually even had the version 2 upgrade pack. They called it an upgrade pack, but it was, you know, a second rule book and things like that. And it was still kind of a mess. You know, the second edition of the rule book was not that much better than the first edition, and it had typos in it. And it's just it's got some really interesting ideas in it. But as a sort of a Euro game, it feels quite like a sort of, I mean, they set the bar quite high, right? Because it was supposed to be a semi-cooperative game about building the Great Wall and defending off the Mongol hordes. And they had some interesting ideas in there, but it didn't really manifest in the prototype. And then in the final version, they seem to have stripped back those ideas and kind of just focused on making a much more middleweight Euro game with sort of first come, first served timing considerations. And it was just okay, and it certainly wasn't worth the amount of overhead you have to put into understanding the rules. Additionally, it's a hand of cards, and on your turn you'll pick a command card, and all these different command cards will interwork with the cards other players have picked. So everyone's simultaneously picking one, they're all flipped up, and then based on what everyone picked, you might get to do a thing or a better version of that thing, which is, at its core, a very compelling idea. You know, and in the more semi-cooperative version of the original prototype, there was a little bit of back and forth where people were discussing that. In the final version of the game, I found that it's really hard to generate conversation around collaborating on that front. And so there wasn't good heuristics to lead you into what people might be playing or picking. And so you just kind of ended up, you know, it ended up feeling completely arbitrary, which was a pity because I thought that card play could be really interesting. But anyway, Grimcoven is developed in-house. It's a boss battler. I enjoy a boss battler when it's a good one. You know, I think there's different ways to approach boss battlers. You know, you've got your sort of like everyone's in a room and it's sort of like a behavior deck skirmish type deal, you know, reminiscent of the Dark Souls board game, the Monster Hunter board game, and recently Primal Awakenings, which is delivered. And actually, interestingly, of the 3 of those which I've played, I actually think the boss fighting in Dark Souls has been the most compelling.
Hmm.
But I've yet to explore all of Primal Awakening. I might revise that position. But the Dark Souls boss fighting, I actually think is really great. Like, it's dynamic and interesting and challenging, and it's just the rest of the game that's the chore. But I don't know what Grimcoven is adding necessarily that would be new to this. I do think there probably is a niche for a really cool, dynamic boss fighting sort of arena style thing. Because, we also played, of course, we played Townsfolk Tussle as well. You can go see those live streams on the show. It wasn't really enough meat on those bones for me and Chris. Not that the campaign was too short or that the character building was too light. That stuff was actually fine. Our main issue was that the actual battles with the bosses themselves felt too random and not strategic enough. And that's one of the, and it's possibly just the expectation we have from those early boss battlers like Dark Souls, the sort of the way that should be done, but to an extent. Oh god, and of course you've got Kingdom Death Monster as well, which is effectively just a boss battler.
Yeah, the first big.
Yeah, that's the first big campaign one, and that's so good as well. I don't think Grimcoven is a campaign. It also has an arena mode. Okay, I'm just checking if it is a campaign game, actually.
Nope, one-off. Jump into various arenas and fight minions, elites, and epic bosses. There are story scenarios, but I'm sure unlocking all those story scenarios might as well be a campaign.
It's a challenge, right, the setting, because if you think about all the boss battlers I just mentioned, Townsfolk Tussle is still 4 linked fights, right? It's like a mini campaign. And then, like, Primal Awakening is a full-on campaign mode, or you can set up one-off fights. But it's definitely designed as a campaign because you've got these sort of escalating complexity in terms of card play and card powers. And so the idea is that you would slot these in a little bit at a time to get a better understanding of their functioning capabilities. And then you've got Dark Souls, which was obviously couched in it wasn't. I don't think it billed itself as a campaign game, but it might as well have been because it was so long. It was hours and hours and hours of resolving rooms, followed by boss fights. If you played the full thing, I think it was 3 boss fights, and each boss fight was a good 4 to 6 hours of gameplay. So might as well have been a campaign, even though it wasn't. And then Kingdom Death is also just a full-on campaign where you fight the same bosses over and over again. So I think it's kind of hard to take a boss battler and put it into a structure that feels simultaneously sort of like it escalates, that it's rewarding, that is also accessible and not like a major sort of undertaking. Leviathan Wilds did it really, really well, actually, where it's just a series of these sort of scenario-based boss fights that gradually escalate as you move your way through it. But that was this much smaller game in a much smaller box, and it was it wasn't actually that much cheaper. We did look at Grimcoven, and you could get access to Grimcoven, which is a $60 standee, none of the deluxe stuff, single layer player boards, edition for $59 to be exact. And then that's got VAT and shipping on top of it. So we worked out if you're in the UK, you're looking at about $90 after that to actually receive it. So that will come with the stretch goals, which is, the ton of extra content for supporting the campaign.
Yeah.
And that's not a terrible. I don't think that's a terrible proposition. I think that's a nicer proposition than
some is the.
Well, you're looking at another $60. So if you want the deluxe one with the miniatures and the double layer player boards and whatnot. So now you're on $140, and I think you're getting into the region of another big box of plastic, right? And it's about whether or not the gameplay is going to hold up. And I looked to see who the designer is, and I looked to see what the rules are like, and it looks like, they've got some ideas. The designer is one of their in-house design team, so hard to tell what they've done before or what sort of game style they might put out. So I really think this one's a big gamble, big risk. Could just be a box of plastic with it'll have a functioning game attached, but whether or not it's actually a compelling proposition will be another matter. Especially if you want to play a boss battler, if that's sort of what you really want, there's a lot of fairly reasonable options out there already. Although I struggle to recommend any necessarily. I've enjoyed what I've seen of Leviathan Wilds. We haven't played enough yet, but I have enjoyed what I've seen of it. They've got a new campaign coming up soon. I'll probably be tempted to back it and get my own copy if I can. And I've enjoyed Kingdom Death Monster, but that's a much bigger, more expensive ongoing proposition. It's a huge campaign game, but it is really good and worth your time if that's how you feel so inclined. Yeah, that's about it.
Cool.
Talked about that a lot longer than I meant to.
Oh yeah, it's fine. Let it out. Coming off crowdfunding sites, however, a couple of things I noticed announced just this week, and hopefully should still be relevant by the time people hear this. Star Trek Captain's Chair. So this is a game by David Turcey and Nigel Buckle, and published by WizKids, and it's a re-implementation of Imperium Classics, Horizons. What's the other one? Legends.
Yeah. Horizons is the new standalone one.
Yeah.
Well, they're all standalone.
Well, they're all standalone, yeah. But they're also mix and match as well, right? So whether or not you can add Star Trek to take on the Celts or the Romans, or potentially the Atlanteans, not yet clear. So,
I don't think that they are.
No, I wouldn't have thought so.
Mix and matchable, but I think that they should have been, because that would definitely be on theme. Like the amount of Star Trek episodes where they're like, welcome to Roman planet, or welcome to Gangster planet.
Correct, just ruining the Prime Directive at any given opportunity. So if you don't know, Imperium series is a competitive deck builder, but the deck building's a lot slower, I would argue, or the whole game's a lot slower than, say, something like Star Wars, the deck builder, or Star Realms, or even Dominion. And it's a lot more complicated how you build up your deck. There's a lot more meat on these games that extend a little beyond just buy a card from a market and do something. So not only do you have your own nation's deck of cards that you're going to be earning cards from, but there's also whether you're going to build up your military presence, or your what else is in there? It's been a while since I played, to be honest. Whether you're going to build up your sort of civilization cards, and what's going to come out at the same time. There's a lot of things that combo off having certain cards at certain times. Some stay out in play, and some will trigger off it, and you'll lose them again. And if you do play solo, the bot had a revised automata and Horizons that was a lot more straightforward, and apparently in this one the scoring's a lot more straightforward as well, which is something they've streamlined and made a lot easier. Just you add up each block of score, so instead of now trying to score for things that are in your deck, things that you've cycled out of your deck, things that are match certain requirements, you're basically just going to stack up all your cards into 3 piles, and they're going to score based on what you've done in each of those arenas. From what I can see, there's not a huge amount of additional information out there about it. So the game does not use TV art, right? So it uses art. I don't know. It's quite tough to tell. No, it's art. It's definitely art. But it looks very much like stills from the TV shows. It's
like the Dune Imperium art, where they used stills from the movie and then just applied that Photoshop filter.
I don't know if that's all they've done, but certainly that is along those lines.
I think they have taken care to repaint a lot of the art in Dune Imperium, actually, and I prefer that to stills from the movies.
Yeah. Well, it's a deal breaker for many people, right? Just having television stills as art. But no, this one they've gone for it. So anyway, in terms of Imperium Classics or Imperium Legends, I did own both of them, but I ended up getting rid of them. I found it too ponderous. So if this speeds some things up and makes the scoring a bit more straightforward, I might be back in. And I don't hate the Star Trek IP.
Yeah, I played Imperium and Legends. I haven't had a chance to look at Horizons. I had much the same sort of experience you had. I found the core puzzle very well considered and very interesting and compelling. I enjoyed playing it, but it did outstay its welcome. It was, for what was the meat on the bones, I think a little bit too long. And so I found it was best at 2 because I didn't really fancy it solo, mainly because I don't like that kind of Euro sort of efficiency puzzly thing solo, typically. More into my narrative-driven solo stuff. But the other thing is, like, at 2 players, the downtime was already enough.
Yeah, I was playing it at 4 players that got me to make the decision to get rid of it. And similarly solo, like it wasn't too difficult to run, but it was plodding again to run everything. And at the higher difficulty levels, so you're flipping over more and more cards and just like, I'm over it.
Yeah, so if they've streamlined that in Horizons, maybe that's worth checking out if that's something that interests people. But yeah, I love Star Trek. I'm keen to check this out, and hopefully I'll get a chance to play it because, generally speaking, Cersei and Buckle are a good, promising design pair, even though Legend, Imperium, the Imperium Collective, was not maybe quite there. They've also, of course, done Voidfall, which is probably the pinnacle of solo parallel play Euro design. It's big, it's long, but it's extremely elegant and compelling. And so, yeah, I'll be keen to see how they've approached Captain's Chair and how it differs from Imperium.
Yeah.
If indeed it does at all. Do we know the timeline on Captain's Chair?
No, I don't think it's been announced when. It might be... it's this year. It's down as this year. But I don't know when. There's not enough out there yet as to... like October or anything like that.
All right. Well, we'll keep this train a-rolling with Avalon the Riven Veil. This is something I saw at UKG that I forgot to mention. I really should have. It is, of course, a area control skirmish type game from Jamie Jolly and Shadowborn Games, who did Oathsworn. I saw the game. I saw it in its early sort of stage. I mean, it's a sort of a full color prototype, but they've had a lot of development work. They've been working on it for a lot, even though we couldn't play it at the convention. And there's a couple of sort of interesting things. So this is definitely one I'm going to keep an eye on. And there might be one thing sort of giving me pause, but other than that, I would be dead set to pull the trigger on this because it is the Riven Veil. The premise is, that there's this sort of period of Arthurian legend that's poorly fleshed out. And so it takes place in that time frame and seeks to sort of populate that part of the story. And it is when they go off to Avalon, and in this version, Mordred has been killed, but in fact, it was a sort of a magical sundering of Mordred from his soul or something like that. And so he's become like an undead king, and he's coming back with an army of the undead. And you've got also King Arthur, who was wounded in the battle with Mordred, who is currently incapacitated. And so the forces of the Round Table and the Knights of Good are being led by Guinevere, his wife. But she can, at some point in the game, resurrect King Arthur to lead the forces. So it's asymmetrical faction based. I don't know what the other two factions are. They didn't have them on show. If indeed there are only two more, there could be even more than that. But it is supposed to go up to 4 players, so there are at least 2 more. And you play the game over a series of ages on the Isle of Avalon, and the board is circular with this sort of outer ring that represents the mists, and then within the ring you place these territories on the board, and the territories lock together to create, the regions you'll be fighting over. But what's particularly nice about the game is that after each age, the mists of Avalon will obfuscate all the regions, and you'll take them off the board and completely deal out a whole new set of regions. With the exception that if you particularly like a region, you can build a castle in it, or a dread keep, or whatever your thematic fortress is, and you can then keep it on the board, so it will sort of lock it into place. So it's sort of got this generative region element to it, which I thought was really interesting and quite compelling. As a premise, I liked that a lot. There's still a set number of regions every age, so although you can explore the new regions, you will not add whole new regions during an age. You'll just sort of reset the board to being sort of misty and hidden in between each age. Other than that, you're amassing troops, and it's got a lot of the sort of the nice things that these kind of games have. You're building soldiers, you're moving them around the board, and you are collecting combat cards. You're developing a sort of a hand of asymmetrical combat cards. And they have multi-purpose. They're used for actions on them. They're also used for bidding in combat and things like that. I think they also have a value on them. They can be paid as resources for certain things. So they're multifunctional cards, and you're going to want to probably use them for everything. And additionally, also, there's a lot of asymmetry within the factions. So you've got a player board, and you can play with the symmetrical sides, so they're all the same, or you can play with asymmetrical sides, which introduces all of this sort of like asymmetrical goals and powers and things like that. For example, your armies are led by champions, which are these models that run around on the board. And if you're on the asymmetrical side of the Knights of the Round Table, each one of those champions becomes one of the Knights of the Round Table with their own special power, which the other factions don't have. And similarly, the Mordred and the Forces of Darkness can recruit soldiers after a battle by raising up the corpses. You get to put out these sort of corpse tokens that generate troops for them if there's been a battle and people have died. So lots of cool stuff going on. And if I have any sort of concerns, it's simply that the big challenge, I think, with these sorts of games is to keep them exciting and tense right up until the end.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen many designers sort of attempt, and to an extent, you can rely on players because of the targeted player interaction. People gang up on the leader. It's kind of assumed you have to bully the leader in these sort of games. And it's so there's sort of self-balancing, I suppose. But you still want the game to be close. If you've got a runaway leader with an incredible force that is unassailable, then the tension from the game is lost, and nobody wants to be battling over second place, really. And we've seen various different games take various different approaches to this, for want of a better term, problem. But you've seen sort of more outlandish approaches to this. The one that springs to mind, of course, is Ankh with the merge mechanism, where partway through the game, 2 players will combine forces and share their collective resources, and that will allow them to come back in the game in a way that is tense. And it's interesting to see how that sort of developed in the culture of competitive players. Some people hated it, really didn't bounce off it hard. I can understand why. I think it's unique and interesting, and I've really enjoyed seeing it in action. And it's really interesting to see this conversations players start having during the game around, like, should we, start to and bank on that we're going to be the players that merge. Should we start playing into that rather than, trying to not be one of the players that merges? And so that at least leads to these interesting discussions and considerations. And I'm all for that kind of thing. Now, in Avalon, Jamie was talking about how there are these game elements that are going to be given out to players who are behind. And that's going to... The one example he showed was the Green Knight, which is a card that goes to... I think it's just a straight catch-up mechanism. I think it just goes to the player with the fewest points, and then they just have an extra powerful unit that they can deploy. But, I've no real issue necessarily with catch-up mechanisms like that. And to an extent, it could be a bit of a false observation, because I think if the catch-up mechanism was more subtly concealed, I would be okay. It's when it's very obvious. It's like, and give this to the person who's losing. Suddenly it's like, okay, well, that's a very obvious catch-up mechanism, But I think there's a way of sort of subtly integrating it or phrasing it where it's not so obvious a catch-up mechanism, right? Like, or it's sort of couched in the steps that would lead you to be last player. So for example, in Blood Rage, if you lose the battle, you get to keep your card, right? Like every time that you trigger a battle in Blood Rage, everyone plays a card, and then the losers all get to keep their cards, and the winner has to give theirs up, right?
Yep.
So, that's just a very simple catch-up mechanism, but it's not, because, it's not super obviously a catch-up mechanism, or it's not just like single out one person who's losing and give them a thing. And I also think, like, when it's that obvious, when it's that binary, if you've got like two players who are like dead last and there might be just a point between them, suddenly you're handing out this thing to like one person, not the other.
Well, even arguably first and second, in a two-player game, second's 1 point behind. How much of a swing does this... How do you account for being miles behind versus just behind?
Exactly. And there was another mechanism that Jamie spoke about where people would be earning points sort of based on how far back they were. So it's sort of like a second catch-up mechanism. And I don't know how this is balanced for two players at all. That's obviously an incredibly different kind of paradigm. Like the shift from 2 to 3 players, it's like night and day, really. And in
maybe
terms.
Quacks like, the rat tails, where the further back you are from first, the more powerful you are, or the more advantage you get, I should say.
Yeah, so there's in Quacks there is a Quacks of Quedlinburg. There's a system where the score track has little thresholds on it, and when the catch-up mechanism, you get to look at the thresholds and count them up, and the number of them between you and the person first is going to trigger something. I can't remember exactly what it triggers. I think is it currency to buy more tokens?
You start further along your cauldron.
Oh, that's right. You get to start further along the cauldron. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
which should translate.
And that works, but that works really well for Quacks, because Quacks is also very much a luck-based game.
Yeah, you're not spending hours playing a game.
The cognitive load that feels in line with the cognitive load of Quacks.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I really, really liked everything I saw about Avalon. The miniatures were gorgeous. I really liked the idea of the multi-use card play and the resetting board and the setting and the asymmetrical faction elements looked great. I was not completely sold on these sort of catch-up mechanisms simply because they always concern me. And I think it's very difficult to get them right.
Yep.
But let me be proven wrong by the design. We shall see.
Can but hope. Fine, another game that kind of popped up on my radar just today, in fact, or yesterday perhaps. Ra and Right. So Ra being the auction game from Reiner Knizia, and this is also Reiner Knizia, published by 25th Century Games sometime next year, and looks to be a It says flipping right on it. I wonder if that means drawing right, like if you draw from a bag.
Well, Welcome to is a flipping right, isn't it?
It is, yeah, but I don't know if there'll be, like, Ra, to my mind, obviously the big thing, those chunky tiles that you're pulling out of the...
Yeah.
To review, I'd hope they'd keep something like that, because it's keeping the same art by Ian O'Toole, so it's still it's the new version of it. But there's also already a Ra dice game. So this will have to be something... I mean, if they're not using dice, fine, like it'd be totally different. And the Ra dice game is really rolling some dice and moving some cubes around the board. But it's a weird one to mash up. There's not a huge amount of information about it. Games played over Old, Middle and New Kingdoms, and you advance different parts of your civilization by filling in your score sheet. I presume that's based on what you've flipped, right, or pulled out of the bag or whatever the actual rolling aspect of it is, because obviously it's not Ra and right, it's not rolling right. I don't know, it's not that clever a name, but I see what they've done or why they've done it. And
right, okay, yeah, I get it.
There must be some push your luck elements, the same as kind of Ra, and like once you've got the third. Oh no, it says cards, 3 Ra cards, so maybe it is a proper flipping right. That's a shame. I did like the chunky tiles.
Well, for what it's worth, the new version of Ra is, incredible. Even the retail version is really, really nice. But the Pharaoh edition is gorgeous. Ra is a great game. A perennial classic. I could take it anywhere. I love Ra. And insofar as roll and rights go, I could almost not be less interested. It's really not my thing. I'm really not a big fan, and as a sort of a premise, I find, if I'm going to play a light filler, I'd rather play something like No Thanks. And I know people bounce off No Thanks, but it's just a bit shouty. It's just a little bit of fun, and then it's over, But give me something that's a bit shouty, right? Or got a little bit more banter to it. Now, having said that, there is a Medici the dice game, and it really is a roll and write, in which you roll a handful of dice that represent the goods from Medici, and then you take turns drafting the dice and coloring in the goods on your player board. And it's got that same sort of thing from Medici, where you're filling up a hold by putting in the right things, and then you're going to score points by collecting the goods, right? And unlike Medici, where there's sort of a set amount of goods and predicting what's in the deck and when things might come up and whether you're going to be able to get the offering is a big part of it. And this is obviously undermined by the fact that you could just roll whatever. It's actually quite good. Like, the Medici dice game is, I think, better than it has any right to be. It's a nice little dice drafting game where you're sort of collecting results and increasing your investment in different dice results over the course of the process, and it doesn't outsit. It's like, 10 to 15 minutes long, and then it's over. So
perhaps this will surprise you as well.
Perhaps. We shall see. I do have a copy of Cascadito here as well, which is his new roll and write. I don't know why I got it. I cannot explain it, but I'll try it. And I'll let you all know if it's changed my mind on Rainer Knizia's roll and writes.
It's his new thing. Got another game for us?
Yeah, this is another outstanding one from UKG. So this is just one I've sort of looked at and found to be relatively interesting. This is the new Czech Games Edition game SETI. And if you know nothing about it, it is based around the premise of the SETI space radio, for want of a better term. I think, don't fact check me, bros.
So it's not, there's already a SETI game, right? So this is the full thing. SETI, search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Which is what SETI is an acronym for. This was at the expo as well, like you say, but again, very, very popular, very busy at the stand at CGE, so I never got a chance to get stuck in.
Yeah, I got a proper talk through of it, and it is a Euro game. It's a first time designer, but the artist is the artist from Scythe.
Right.
So if you liked the art in Scythe, it's not, the same aesthetic. Obviously, this is a more realistic thing, but the artist is very good. So the art in the game looks very pleasing, and the designer is sort of an expert in the subject matter, the concept of SETI and space exploration through satellites and radio and things like that. Stuff I'm not very good at understanding. Um, so it's a very realistic game. It's couched in a very sort of realistic approach to the subject matter. It is a very Euro game. It's quite an abstract Euro game, but the core conceit is that you're, taking actions on your turn, and you've got this sort of upgradable, developable player board, and there's all these different avenues to points, and there's going to be points everywhere coming from all the different things you can do. But at its core, what you're trying to do is get satellites out in space and capture information and plug it into a computer that is just an upgrade track on your player board. And then you can eventually find intelligent life. And there's a couple of tracks that progress towards intelligent life. And you can put different sort of things up there. And again, it's a very realistic approach. So like the intelligent life might be signs of it on an asteroid. But they did look like there was one fun tile, and remind me to talk about that later, Barry. The fun tile. We'll get back to that.
A single fun tile.
Well, yeah, that they might have put in for people like me. We'll see. But
Right, okay.
at the center of the board is the sun, and then around the sun is the solar system, and the solar system is on different levels. So you've got what effectively looks like a sort of a circular cardboard pyramid with the sun at the apex of the pyramid, and then each level, which descends outwards from the sun, also rotates. And as it rotates, and they're not complete levels, so they might have gaps in them. And as it rotates, it will reveal different astrological elements, asteroids and planets and space gas and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to shoot your satellites off into space, and you want to get them on the right trajectories to capture the information that you want based on the strategy that you're pursuing. But if, of course, the Earth, because they're coming out of the Earth, which is not in the middle of the board, it's on one of the rings, because that's how the solar system works. If you want to get it over to one side of space, you either have to wait for the Earth to rotate around there, or you have to fire the satellite through the sun, which I think is possible. It's just way more expensive.
Right, okay, yeah.
Because where it sort of differs from the reality of space is that, of course, it's not really 3D, it's a 2D board. It's sort of like a top-down look at the rotating solar system. Anyway,
Gotcha.
It's all about placing those satellites, and then you're bouncing radio around them in order to unlock these things. There's also big decks of cards that give you different powers and can be used for all different kinds of resources, but that's about as far as I got. I do know that all the cards in the game are unique as well, so that was interesting. And all the pieces are the Rewood style that they used in Kutnahora. So if you ever saw that game, it was a very pretty looking game. This one promises to be quite attractive as well. And the fun tile, because we're all
Yeah, that's what I want to know.
exploring space. We're all corporations exploring space, and obviously we have the good of humanity at heart, and we would never do anything untoward to jeopardize humanity. But the fun tile is, I guess it's a nod to the concept of the dark forest, which you might be familiar with if you've been watching The Three Body Problem on Netflix, or if you've read the books upon which it is based. But it is a theorized response to the idea of why have we not met intelligent life? If it exists, why have we not encountered it? And the answer is that space is a dark forest, and there is no safe way to diplomatically introduce yourself to another race, because it takes so long to travel through space that by the time you had done so, the entities receiving your messages or communications would be completely advanced or different, or if they decided to attack you upon the receipt of the message, the information that you exist, then you would have no way of responding in a meaningful time frame. You would be utterly destroyed without any real concept of what was going on. So everyone's hiding in the dark forest for fear of mutual annihilation, because sending out these radio waves and telegraphing your existence, could have
Too late for us,
apocalyptic results. Yeah, I mean, we're obviously not really thinking too hard about that here on Earth. But
Too late. We've sent out loads of messages now.
well, I don't think they got very far. Clearly not far enough anyway. Or we're all about to be destroyed by an incoming alien weapon that we have no knowledge of. Who knows? But anyway, so there is a tile in the game that sort of represents the concept of the dark forest, and you become aware that there is a hostile alien intelligence out there. Or at least you become aware that there are these sort of radio communications coming from an entity that may not be entirely friendly, which you can then continue to... I might be over-egging a little how much this is sort of... Because, we had a brief look at the prototype. Yeah. So it might not be as big a deal as all that. Certainly you can just not put it in the game. But the idea is that the more you explore it, it actually... or sort of like communicate with these aliens or whatever it is, if indeed it is even as far as intelligence life. Like I said, most of the other tiles are just, a rock with some, vague evidence on it. But this one seems to be a little bit more robust. But as your evil corporation begins to enact with it, then that could have bad repercussions, because there's sort of like a hidden track, and we'll check to see how much everyone interacted with it. And if everyone interacted with it too much, then it triggers this sort of negative effect.
The end times.
I don't think it's anything quite so dramatic, unfortunately. But, that was there was sort of an element of that as well. But I don't know if that's always going to be in the game setup. It was certainly set up on the demonstration they had at the UKG. Anyway, SETI, it looks interesting, and I'm excited to check it out at Essen when it will come out.
Fun. So, off the back of Ada's Dream, which we talked about earlier with Ada Lovelace, another game announced from... Well, Sorry We Are French, right, which is Hachette. And it's in the footsteps of Marie Curie. And... was it a couple of years back, they did In the Footsteps of Darwin?
Yep.
But this is a different designer. So this is designed by Florian Fay, but it's the same... It's not the same game, but like it's clearly a series now, right? Of In the Footsteps. And another women in STEM being highlighted with Marie Curie. So here you're assisting her in her research, where you'll discover radium. You'll be conducting experiments, you will improve your laboratory and write theses, all leading up to getting the Nobel Prize. And the rules for that were just put up, and it looks fairly interesting. The core part of the game is kind of doing these experiments in your workshop. Exactly how that works, I'm not totally aware. But then you've got the timeline on the board, where all the different stages of Marie Curie's life happen, which changes things like your income and what you're trying to achieve. And eventually working towards getting to the end, where you win the Nobel Prize, and then add up the points for everything that you've proven, all the theses that you've written. But more than that, it's a resource management change. You can change your uranium into radium, or you can change them both into VPs, which is obviously is less real life, but gets you closer to winning the game.
It's the ultimate element.
Yeah. The victory points. And you got the cards, which have like the experiments you're trying to prove. So then you got to run them through your workshop to get the right kind of elements and ingredients, and prove whether or not that's a valid observation, which you can then turn in. You can turn in enough of them to write your thesis, go through the different stages before potentially winning the Nobel Prize. So I do quite like Hachette as a publisher. not all their games are knocked out of the park, but they do a lot of interesting things. And did you swing by Hachette's stand? Did you see Flavian at the expo in his Pac-Man suit or whatever he was wearing?
Yeah, I saw. It was hard to miss that suit.
Yeah. So I went to a con with him, like when Hachette first started publishing board games. It was in Milton Keynes. It was like the first one he'd done, and they were just coming over here and doing it. And since then, they've published like just interesting things. Like I'm not always into what they're publishing, but I'm always interested in seeing what they're publishing. And this one looks like a pretty solid game overall. I've actually not played in the footsteps of Darwin. I did play Encyclopedia.
Yes, I played Encyclopedia as well.
There was someone else that came out at the same time that was Darwinish, I'm sure. Just that theme, but they followed it up with this, and I think it looks interesting from what I can read, but you never know until you really get a game to the table and played.
Well, fair enough. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they do. Like, I don't know if they've got any major misses. Well, actually, that's not true. I do know that. I enjoyed Iki well enough. I didn't keep it in my collection, but I enjoyed Iki, and I enjoy Altry from them as well, which is the cooperative sort of adventure style game.
Gotcha. The things that were more interesting to me from them, which I've actually not played, they've got rolling rights, and was it Ganymede or Demeter or Varuna, one of the ones on the sort of space planets, and they were doing Zhanghua, the First Empire, which is one of the games I did want to see at the expo, which again I didn't quite manage to get to again. So they're just publishing interesting things. I think a couple of things they first brought over were not setting the world alight, but I think they're getting stronger and stronger every year, and so I'll keep an eye on anything that they're putting out.
So that's In the Footsteps of Marie Curie from Sorry We Are French.
Oui, oui, mon français, très bien. But speaking of playing games, perhaps we should get on to what we've actually been tabling.
Yes. I just want to bring up this interesting fact here. Harmonies, the second most played game on BGG. What?
So that is for the month of May, and by unique players. So not the most plays. So if one player played 10 times, that's still just one person. That still just counts as one. That still only counts as one, even if you take down the Oliphant. Yeah, so I mean, it's obviously very popular, right? Or at least people are getting it to play it the first time, and everybody's trying it, and everybody's like, oh, you got to play this, you got to play this. So
we spoke about Harmonies on the last episode.
Yeah.
I think it fits really solidly into that sort of, middleweight puzzler filler kind of area. Very pretty to look at, very quick to set up, hard, decent pace, even at 4, hard to sort of,
You can get a lot of people into it quite quickly. I mean, for what it's worth, the number one game was Arc Nova, which has been for the past 2.5 years or whatever. People are still jumping on it and playing it, or regularly playing it as well if they have it.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
But yeah, just seeing Harmonies was a surprise.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess it's interesting of note, and we should possibly talk about Arc Nova on a future episode. But for now, let's stick with what we've played recently on this episode.
All right. So coming back from the Games Expo, I wasn't going to buy much, but I did buy a few things, mostly the smaller games to play. And first one I got was Star Wars Bounty Hunter. So designed by Frédéric Henry and published by Zygomatic. Now, the game is a drafting game with 4 decks, right? There's one deck of bounties, which are the heroes of Star Wars. There's one deck of bounty hunters, the best that scum and villainy can provide. There's a deck of contracts which offer bonuses for capturing some of the bounties, and then there's a deck with droids and supplies in it that you might want to use. So the game starts, you start with one card from each deck, and it is a simultaneous drafting game. So you, in whatever order, pick a card from one of those decks. So you've now got 5 cards, choose one to play, and then pass the other 4 around to the next player. And that's kind of it. So the bounties themselves have 3 shield values, red, blue and green. And as far as I can tell, it's not any more thematic than that, right? They've just got 3 different values. That it's not like red's their attack and blue's, their ship or anything like that. It's just red, blue and green. Bounty hunters have the same as do droids, but those are just their attack values, right? So red, blue, green attack values. And you can assign a bounty hunter or a droid to a bounty, and when the values on your guys equal or better the values on the bounty, then you complete that bounty and you get the points for it at the end of the game. Contracts can give you bonus points for certain bounties if you get them, and the supplies are really just used for contracts or for extra points at the end. Whenever a player hits 4 bounties, that will trigger the end of the game. You'll get 2 more goes. And then each bounty is worth points, but you lose points for each bounty hunter used to capture them. So they require being paid out, sharing in the rewards for whoever they've captured. And there's not much more to it. I knew how it played going into it, and I mostly bought it because you could capture Baby Yodas, and I love some Baby Yodas. However, I hoped that it was one of those games that was going to be more fun than the rules, and it'd be a good filler, but it is not. It's kind of boring. The game needs just a little more engine to it, a little something that does more. Like it becomes very stale in terms of the cards that you're drawing and playing. Whether you rush or go for a bigger one, debatable, because like the rewards are obviously better on the bigger characters, but you need to spend more bounty hunters to do it, and it all just kind of washes out. It's quite dull in the grand scheme of things, which is disappointing. And then when I was looking at it, there's an oddly high percentage of French reviews for this, at 9 and 10 on Board Game Geek. Not accusing anybody of anything, I'm just saying that the reason that it's a 7 point whatever is very much propped up by those 9s and 10s, which is an unnatural amount of French language reviews at the top there.
Are you sure it's not just like in French it's great and in English it's bad?
I think it maybe came out first in French, and the designer is French.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. And in the French language, the game is great. It's just the translation that's let it down.
Well, unless the rules are very different, because there's no language on the cards. So it's not as if the translation's gone awry.
Is it possible that the French as a demographic just love really basic drafting games?
It could well be. I think that must be the only logical explanation that one can take from there. I'd put it more at a 5.
How far they've fallen from the heady heights of Papa You so long ago.
Exactly, yeah. We thought they could do no wrong, but suddenly.
Star Wars Bounty Hunter.
Yeah, so that was disappointing for the first one, but I did get another little game in that's actually quite fun. That game's Shoal, and that's designed by Mike Peacock and published by Molinarius, who also do Ocean Pods, was their big one from sort of last year at the Expo. And this game is a tableau building game where you're laying down square cards that are put into a grid 4x4, of which there are 4 colours, and on which there are 4 different types of fish, or maybe 5 different types of fish, which can either be small or big. And on each card there could be a varying number of fish, from a single big fish to maybe 6 little fish. And the way you do it is you'll have 2 cards in hand, you'll play a card, and then you'll draw a card from either a face down or a face up pile. But you're basically going to get 10 cards in total to build up your tableau, and you score based on, there's about 12 different objective cards, and so every game you'll flip one over and you might score, the base score line is 1 point for every fish, so no matter what size, what colour, whatever. But then you might gain points for every big green fish might be worth 2 extra points or something. So okay, everybody's looking for the big green fish. But you might score based on the number of orthogonally adjacent blue fish, or each space that has a blue fish in it. So then you add them up, whoever's got the biggest area gets bonus points. Or you might have minus points for everybody that has a wormy fish, like one of those little, it looks like a worm. I don't know. I don't think they're real fish.
An eel?
No, yeah, well, let's call it an eel. It was definitely a fish because it had a tail. I mean, I know eels have tails, but like imagine a split tail. Doesn't matter, like a little wormy fish. And that changes every game. So what you're trying to work towards, and it's really quick. It's really light. You can't put a blank space over a fish, but you can put a fish over a fish when you're building them up. They've always got to cover some things. Your tableau never gets massively out of hand. There's only ever 10 cards in your tableau, and what you're working towards just changes every game. It's very light as well, except this is fun. And deciding, if something's giving you negative points, how many of those you cover up versus, well, what if I just don't care and I just get as many of them as I can because they're worth a point on their own? Can I outpoint the bad thing? And whilst the game only tells you to flip over one objective card, I think I'm going to try playing by flipping over like 3 objective cards, where there's probably going to be counter, what's the word I'm after? Like you'll have fish that get you points, but they also give you minus points on the different objectives, and I'll try that and see if that's any fun as well. But the game only takes 10 minutes, and it's unlike Bounty Hunters, it's actually fun to play. So that was very cool. And then I did a couple of trades and sales at the expo, and I used that to get the Dresden files, so the cooperative card game. I don't know if you've seen it. It's been something that's been on my radar for a while. I'm not a huge Harry Dresden fan, so it's a series of books. I think there's like 16, 17 books now at this point. He is a wizard for hire out of Chicago, and the world is, imagine like it's modern day, but wizards and stuff are real.
Right.
Not like Harry Potter though. But
right, it's not got the sort of the concept of like a hidden world. It's out in public. Yeah,
like people know about it, but it's not. It's still the underground. Like not everybody's on board with magic, right? It's an urban fantasy where it's a little more dark than Harry Potter or whatever. It's more like Buffy, right? Buffy or Angel. Angel's a good description for it, where they are, they had their agency, and it's along those lines. People will come to them, something supernatural's happening to me, and then he'll go out and solve it. So I thought for the longest time that this was a deck builder, but it is not. So it's Eric B. Vogel, who also done First Empires, Katara. I don't know if you've seen either of those. Published by Evil Hat Productions. And I think there's like 14 books in there, and each book is 12 cards. And those 12 cards are out every time you play that scenario. And they're all dealt out at the start, and they're put into 2 rows from closest to furthest away. And the composition of every deck is different, but there's usually things to solve, there's monsters to fight, there's obstacles to overcome, there's advantages to gain, and that's kind of it. Now, the co-op element of the game is how you play cards. So every card has a cost, but it's a shared monetary pool that you're using to pay for it. So if you play a big card, then the next person can't play their big card because there's not enough points for them. So they will instead have to discard a card to regenerate mana, or whatever it's called, fate, for the next person to play a card. and everybody's got their own deck, and that's only a deck of, say, 10 cards as well. You'll start with, depending on the difficulty, say 7 cards, and it's quite hard to draw anymore. But, you know, some of the characters have powers that let you draw them. Sometimes you get an advantage that will let you draw a card. And you're playing your cards in order to overcome the enemies, or overcome the obstacles, defeat the enemies, and solve the cases until you get to the end, when nobody's got any more cards left, or whether you don't want to spend any more fate to play a card. And you will win the game if there are fewer enemies left on board than cases that you've solved. So a normal 12 card deck, or the basic 12 card deck, is 4 enemies, 4 cases, 2 obstacles, 2 advantages. If you solve 3 cases and defeat 2 enemies, you would win at the end of the scenario, because there's only 2 enemies left on board and you've overcame 3 stages of the game. It is fine. I think I'll play through everything once, but there's not a huge reason to go back and replay them, even with different characters. So every character's got their own unique deck, but they all do the same thing, right? You're either hitting, solving, moving cards around. There's different things you can do. And it is entirely serviceable, and if you like the books, you oh yeah, I recognise that, and I recognise that, that's clever. But it is not a game that I think people are going to be going back to over and over again. I don't know if you've seen it or played it at all, but...
No, I know nothing about this. I actually just had a little Google while you were explaining the game, because I was like, I think I read some of those books, but I was thinking of an entirely different urban sort of magic thing, which is, I think, more focused on exorcism. The Felix Castor series by Mike Carey is what I was thinking of.
Not heard of that. Well, I've gone through, so since getting this, I've read the first couple of books, and you're very much chucked in at the deep end. I'm looking forward to the bits that expand on the world building, but mostly you're just there. You just have to accept that the people that know about the supernatural accept that they're supernatural, and some people don't know that they're supernatural. They don't know what's happening. So, but there's things that are thrown in that have not yet been expanded upon. You just have to roll with it. It seems to begin with. It's like, okay, fine. Well, you got 17 books, so much like Wheel of Time, I'm sure it gets.
Are there 17 books?
I think we're up to 17 yet.
Wow.
And that's not including the comics, the short stories, the other bits and pieces.
So a popular IP then.
Yeah, I mean, I think so, but not broken through into mainstream. You know, it needs there was a TV series, but it was nothing really. It was not close enough to the books to be for fans to love it. I've enjoyed the TV series. That was my introduction to it, but I've since gone on to read some of it.
But the game is not doing enough for you to keep you around in the collection.
No, like, it's definitely one to pass on once I've gone through it. Once, like, there's not enough there, but sure, you get 14 of the books to go through, but it's the same every time, and solo in this game is play 3-handed.
I mean, sometimes that's fine, and sometimes it's not. It really depends on the game.
Correct. It's not unmanageable by any stretch of the imagination. So,
do you think there's any appeal there for people who don't know the IP at all?
I think you'll get less out of it. Like, it'll be much more mechanical for you. And that may make it all a little bit samey.
Yeah.
If you're not enjoying seeing how a certain character has been represented in the cards, or if you're not enjoying, so I mean, spoilers for the first book, but you know, the enemies are this giant scorpion, then there's the frog guy, and then you got to take down the shadow man at the end. You know, some mob goons, and then you take down the shadow man at the end. But there's no story there, right? So it doesn't tell you who the shadow man is. It doesn't tell you, when you're solving the cases, you don't understand what you're working towards. I don't want to spoil the first book at all, but you know, you learn who the shadow man is from like an earlier case, and it all kind of ties together, and you're not sure whether it's the mob boss that's behind it all, or whether it's somebody else. And if you were mechanically going through those cards, it's going to be a very dry affair for you. It's just, okay, I need to get 12 clues on this card. When I get 12 clues on this card, if I solve it with my player card, I can move 3 of those clues onto something else, and I can, and when this case is solved, I can do 2 damage to a certain other character, kind of thing. So the puzzle itself is there, but it's going to be dry, let's put it that way, because there's no story on the cards. It's not like, say, Arkham Horror, the card game, or something, or really even the alien encounters or predator encounters, or legendary encounters, any of them. Like, you work through the story, you're working through defeating an enemy, you're working through the objectives. The story comes out of the cards a little more, and it just does not in this game. So I think that's why, I think it definitely held it back.
And just quickly then, also, if you play through, you said there's 14 sort of chapters to the board game?
There's also a whole stack of side jobs where you can make your own.
Is it going to spoil the novels if you haven't read them?
Well, no. From the point of view, and you literally are not getting any of the story from the cards.
Right.
It might spoil characters. Like, oh, that guy's in this book, I didn't know that. Like, if he's the big bad as a reveal. But even the first book, the Shadow Man, who, like, he's just like a character all in black on the card, and, gives nothing away. Just the Shadow Man. There's no flavour text. There's no...
I wonder if that was a stipulation of the production, if they were like, oh yeah, you can make this board game, but don't spoil the plots.
Possibly, but it seems like how many people are going to play this game without having some interest in the Dresden Files?
I mean, like, if it was an incredible game, if you were like, this is amazing, I'd play it. For sure, I like urban magic as a sort of a setting. That's fun. But, if it's a dry sort of puzzle, then I've got a lot of those.
Yeah. Like, I can't overly recommend it. I'm going to go through them all and play with all the different characters, and then probably move it on. Like, it's not something that's going to be, oh, we got to bust this out again.
All right. That's Dresden Files from Evil Hat Productions. What's next?
Well, just one last one. So I swapped Airship Cities for Costa Rica. So that's a Matthew Dunstan and Brett J. Gilbert's game, published by Lookout Games. But anyway, this is 2016, and last week you heard me wax lyrical about Matthew Dunstan and Perspectives board game. This time, this is another yawn fest, unfortunately, just as a spoiler. But the game is played. You set up a board, so it's a whole bunch of hexes. And you'll set them all up, and they've got different biomes on them again. So this will be swamps, mountains, forests, and on the flip side of those tiles are different animals. And those animals are there's definitely toucans, there's frogs, there's snakes, cheetahs, all these different animals that I presume live in Costa Rica. I don't know much about Costa Rica's ecosystem. And at each corner of the board, once you've set it up, you put a meeple to represent an expedition. And on your turn, you may, as expedition leader, choose anywhere one of your meeples are and move one tile. When you move that tile, you flip it over and you see what's on it. Now, those tiles will either have just the animal, potentially 2 of an animal, or a danger symbol. And so once you've seen that, your choice is then, do you want to take what you've revealed? If not, everybody else in that expedition, going in a clockwise order, will get the opportunity to take that tile. If nobody takes it, comes back to you, then you can go to another tile adjacent from where you now are and flip it, and same thing again. Do you want to take all the tiles you've revealed or not? And again, if you pass, it goes around the table, everybody in the expedition, until at some point somebody takes the tiles. And when you take a tile, you remove your member from the expedition and you gain all of those tiles. So it's a little bit of, well, what are other people collecting? Can I push my luck to go further? or can I get them out of the expedition so it's just me left? The other way an expedition would end is if you flip 2 danger tiles, in which case the 2 danger tiles will get removed from what you're doing, but you still get to take all the other tiles. And so the actual risk for doing it in a 4-player game, which we played, was quite minimal, because you're still getting stuff. And then you've removed a lot of the tiles for other players to have. But eventually, if it gets down, there's only you left. You can, in an expedition, you can work your little man going around. So a little bit like, hey, that's my fish. You know, if you can cut off other expeditions so they can't get anywhere, or you can keep going until you flip 2 danger tiles. And the end game scoring is based on the different types of animals you get. So you're looking for sets. The larger your sets, up to like 7, the more points you're going to get, and you're also looking for collections of the 7 different types of animals for bonus points, and that is it. But basically on your turn, you take your guy, you move 1 space, you have a look at a tile, you decide whether you want it. If not, everybody else chooses, and then you go again. So it was a little bit dull again as far as games go. There's no engines, there's no combos, there's no special powers.
But you can collect all the tokens.
Well, yeah, but anything more than 7 or 9 does nothing for you. So at some point you have to give up on the tokens. Still, again, I played it. Glad I played it. It is not one that I'll be keeping, but I will pass it on. And I think I made $2 out of the trade, right? I think Costa Rica is slightly more valuable than the airship cities.
This is Barry's new side section of the podcast where he's attempting to trade his way up from airships to Glory of Rome Black Box.
I could try it, right? That's a good game.
In the meantime, Costa Rica by Lookout Games, not one to spend your time on unless you're particularly curious.
Even if you live there.
Unless you're a token fanatic.
Well, do you know how many people can play this game? At least 2 can. Lols.
Now, moving swiftly on to the only game I'm going to talk about in this section of the podcast, which is also going to be the final section of this podcast.
Unless Andromeda's Edge, what is that?
So, Andromeda's Edge is a big Kickstarter from Cardboard Alchemy. You'll know, and I say Kickstarter, I think it was GameFound. I've been trying to say
crowdfunded. Yeah, it's hard, right? Yeah. Kickstarter very much got in there the same way. Hoover, Kleenex. Yeah.
Exactly. Google it.
Exactly.
So, Cardboard Alchemy, you'll know them from their lovely productions, particularly Flamecraft, and also Dwellings of Eldervale. Now, the reason that comes up particularly is because it's the same designer. It's Luke Laurie. And Luke Laurie is a designer whose name I've come across a few times. And actually, I thought he had more games to his name. But really, there are 5 games, and I've played 4 of them. And there might be some more minor things. There was also a BGG entry for a prototype he developed at some point, which looked very interesting, but I don't think it was ever published. But the 2 games, which you might, if you've not played Dwellings of Eldervale, and a lot of this talk of Andromeda's Edge is going to be a talk about Dwellings as well, because they are, if you look on BGG, Andromeda's Edge re-implements Dwellings, and part of this discussion is around the similarities and differences. And if you've played neither, I will maybe try to put that in a section that you can skip, but because it will probably sound quite jargonistic and maybe unhelpful to you. But if you have played neither of those, you might have played 2 of his other games. The first is called Whistle Mountain, and the second is called Cryo. Cryo was a co-design with a chap called Tom Jolly. And I believe Whistle Mountain was also a co-design. And the Andromeda's Edge is designed by Luke Laurie, and actually he's also credited Maximus Laurie on it, which is his son. So his son must have had some significant role in possibly the playtesting. I don't know how old Maximus Laurie is. He could well be a full game designer in his own right, or, a younger kid with lots of good ideas. I have no idea. But what I can tell you about all 4 games that I've just mentioned is that they sort of feature Luke Laurie. Oh, he also did... he has done. He did Manhattan Project...
Energy Empire.
Energy Empire, that's right. I only played the original Manhattan Project. I didn't play Energy Empire. Me too. So I can't really talk about that. But there is this sort of signature Luke Laurie mechanism, which is that the game is worker placement. So on your turn, you place a worker and then you take an action. And at some point, you will run out of workers. And either at that point or before that point, you can recall all of your workers. And when you do that, there's some sort of mechanism that you can activate. So in both Andromeda's Edge and Dwellings of Eldervale, you're actually simultaneously building a tableau. And when you recall your workers, you place them onto the cards in the tableau in order to gain benefits. In Cryo, you're actually doing a similar sort of thing. You recall these workers from the board, and they go into these cards that you've slotted into your player board. No, sorry. They go into set positions on your player board, which you can upgrade. So you can slot cards into the positions. It's a small nuance, but it is different. And then I can't remember what the deal was in Whistle Mountain. When you recalled them, they'd come back to your player board. Then something would happen. You were sending airships out to build a bridge in that game. Whistle Mountain sort of sticks out because it was very much like a geometric puzzle. There's a lot of geometric shapes, that polyominoes in that, which the other games don't use. Cryo is much more of a sort of like abstract Euro kind of collect the pointsy type thing. I think of all 4 games that I've mentioned, it's definitely the driest, although it has an incredibly bombastic art style. But enough about that. Dwellings of Eldervale. So was a big Kickstarter that they did, and then it was with Breaking Point Games. So I don't know if Cardboard Alchemy signed a contract with Breaking Point, or this might be before Cardboard Alchemy was working with Luke. I don't know the history of the companies. What I do know is that Breaking Point took away Dwellings of Eldervale, and with, as far as I can tell, completely amicable passing of ways. And then Luke went on to do Andromeda's Edge with Cardboard Alchemy as a sort of a solo thing. And now it's being distributed by Frosted Games and Lucky Duck Games. But they are big worker placement games, and they are sort of fundamentally Euro sensibilities, but with a huge injection of American design sensibilities. So there is dice chucky combat and lots of card draw and rotating marketplaces and things like that. But in Andromeda's Edge, the theme is space. And now, this is actual text from the actual rule book that I'm going to read you now.
Ooh.
You lead a desperate faction seeking to build a new civilization on Andromeda's Edge. You begin with only a space station and a few ships and a handful of resources. By carefully placing your ships, you'll gather resources, claim moons, acquire station modules, and build planetary developments. You will battle opponents and compete with others in science, industry, commerce, civilization, and supremacy, which are the 5 Euro tracks present in the game. So, Cardboard Alchemy have made a big deal of saying this is not just dwellings in space. It's kind of just dwellings in space. It's not, but it sort of is. If I like Dwellings of Eldervale, it's very polarizing. People bounced off Dwellings because they found the randomness of the dice combat resolution to be too random and frustrating. They also found the card bit, the card acquisition. Specifically, I'm talking about the adventure cards that would build your tableau for when you called your workers. They found that to be a bit too random as well. One of those problems has been vaguely addressed in Andromeda's Edge. But if you didn't like Dwellings, I don't think you're going to like this either. But if you did like Dwellings and you love Dwellings and you're hoping for more of that sort of thing, then you're going to be very happy, although you might be concerned that it's not different enough. If you just wanted Dwellings to be broader, then you will be very pleased.
So is it broader as in more to do?
So it is fundamentally more complex than Dwellings. It has changed mechanisms in it's added tweaks. It's tweaked mechanisms. It's added little extra bits. Somehow the rulebook is like 3 times the length of the Dwellings rulebook. I don't know why. I didn't read the rulebook. I was lucky enough to play this with the publisher, and we had an expert at the table teaching the game and helping us play it. We played at 5 players, which is the maximum player count. So it's very argy-bargy. I mentioned combat. There was a lot of combat on the board. It's not combat in the traditional sense. It's very much a sort of a mechanism that serves to further furnish the other mechanisms in the game. So it is a competitive game. It's everyone against everyone else. You're trying to get the most points. It is a pretty long game. It says 40 minutes to 200 minutes on the box. I mean, we took a lot longer than 200 minutes, but we were 5 players and we were socializing and chatting and drinking. So, that's, I don't think unreasonable, but I reckon probably I have 2 players who were super across it doing 40 minutes. Maybe.
Well, 40 minutes for anything other than perhaps solo doesn't make much sense.
Yeah, you'd also, I think, probably spend 40 minutes just setting it up. So, and now it does come, at least the Kickstarter edition comes with a whole series of game trays, and the setup's actually pretty quick. So, it's probably 40 minutes of arguing over what faction you're going to be, remember where all the tokens go and things like that. But anyway, the point, it's not going to be that long. But the point is, I reckon maybe half an hour per player is probably a more reasonable guess if everyone knows how to play. And it's a really sort of like hobby dense game, right? Like Dwellings was already very dense and had a lot going on. This has even more going on. And there's also like, it's a point salad-y type thing. There's points everywhere. You should probably score about 1/3 of your points during the game, and then you can get up to another 2/3 at the end, depending on how well you've played. And there's a lot of points firing at you during the game as well, and it can be quite random. For example, the 5 tracks that represent all of your space achievements that I mentioned earlier, science, industry, commerce, civilization, supremacy, there are event cards that will come out at fixed points in the game, and each one of those event cards will randomly choose one of these tracks to score. So that will just trigger scoring on the track. All of the tracks are also scored during endgame, but individual tracks scored at fixed points or unpredictable points. Yeah, no, I don't want to say random because it's an event track, and certain player actions cause the event track to advance. And when it hits a threshold, it will trigger the resolution of an event card, which causes the scoring of the track. But
fine, but you know which track it's going to be.
No, you
ahead
don't.
Of time.
But you might. You might, but you might not. And that whole mechanism and how you interact with it is all new. None of that was in Dwellings. There are tracks in Dwellings. They're the elemental tracks. They're functionally the same as these tracks. These tracks are doing a lot more. There's sort of more bonuses and things you can pick up on them. But Dwellings didn't score them during the game. Dwellings, they were just endgame scores.
Mm-hmm.
But the way you advanced up the tracks is quite similar. So I'll get to that in just a minute. But what I'm sort of getting at here with the there's not a lot of like low level heuristics, and there's points everywhere, and so it's really like not a good entry level. I think people who are dropped in, who are not sort of hobby gamers, who are going to be able to look at, for example, the modules, which are now this game's version of the adventure cards, the things you put in your tableau when you call your workers back. if you don't know that getting a bunch of those is probably a really good move, then you're going to be, a bit out at sea, right? But if you're the kind of gamer that looks at those and goes, okay, I'm going to be recalling my workers at certain points during the course of the game, being able to upgrade these actions so that when I recall them, I can do more cool things, seems like a really fundamental, important thing. If that's the kind of inference you can make instinctively, then this is the kind of game that you'll be able to intuit reasonably well. But if you don't think players can do that, then this is going to be deep water for them, right?
Right.
Because it uses a lot of interworking hobby mechanisms, and it's not got like sort of low level heuristics. So it's not like, and this is the one way you get points. Try to do whatever you can to earn points that way. It's like, no, everything gives you points. So it's like, well, what do I do? It's like, well, I don't know, whatever you want.
Yeah.
You're gonna get points for it probably. There's no bad moves, right? And so that's the other thing, right? Like it's because it's a long game, but it's not like, I was thinking about the weight. I was like, is this a heavy game? And it's not that heavy. It's got a lot of rules overhead, and it is your game for the evening. It's big, it's chunky. It's probably going to be like 2 to 3 hours, based on player count. It's not like each turn you're sort of like heads down sweating. It's not like each individual move is sort of an agonizing decision. There will be some turns that are kind of throwaway turns, where you're like, oh, I'm not really sure. Maybe I'll just grab some resources and then see what happens. So you can't like make sort of critically bad mistakes that are going to take you out of the game moment to moment, which is nice.
Well, Board Game Geek has it at 3.55, which is pretty heavy as far as...
Yeah, and I'd say that's probably quite accurate. But as I said, it's sort of like who's the audience, right? Like, I think it's the audience is people who've been in the hobby a long time, who are au fait with quite complex systems, but who want something that might be a bit fun, a bit of a laugh. It is quite a random game. It's got a lot of random mechanisms, and I'm going to come on to that in just a minute. But for what it's worth, I really liked Dwellings in Eldervale. I had a lot of fun playing it. I also really liked Andromeda's Edge. I enjoyed it. I've still got my copy of Dwellings. There's a lot of fun nonsense happening in that. And a lot of that same sort of stuff is here in Andromeda's Edge.
Will you keep both? Or do you have Andromeda's Edge? No?
I did back it, so I will be receiving a copy at some stage. But this is an early sort of first print. Yeah. This is the print that the publisher gets to make sure that it all looks good before they finally sign off on the printing. And but I did back it, and when I receive it, I will keep it. The question is whether then I keep Dwellings. I'll probably play Dwellings a few more times and see if I feel the need. But I think it might come back to the old question of... Oh, bear with me here, Barry, while I think of the game. What was the game?
Are we Gaia Project versus Terra Mystica, or are we...
Yes, exactly that. That's exactly the one I was looking for. It'll come back to the old question of Gaia Project versus Terra Mystica, right? And just like those games, the sci-fi version is a little bit heavier. It's got a little bit more rules overhead. It's got a little bit more interlocking mechanisms. But fundamentally, I don't think the gameplay changes are so significant that if fantasy is your jam and you just love the monsters in Dwellings of Eldervale, that this is going to then overcome that preference.
Yeah, you wouldn't have to have this version because it's so much better,
Here's some of the fundamental rules of the game, just to give you a better sense about it. And then I'm going to talk a bit about the differences and similarities. This is not an exhaustive list. This is just what I could think of when I was making notes for the podcast. So believe me, there's probably more going on. Now, in both games, and this is, so before I get into differences and similarities, this is just some fundamentals about the games, right? They are worker placement games. On your turn, you place a single worker onto a board. The board is a set of tiles that you've created during setup. More tiles will be added to the board over the course of the game. There is a marketplace of cards, which you can acquire into your player area. And when you recall your workers from their positions on the board, they'll go onto those cards and trigger additional benefits. And typically this is resources. Both games have a set of 5 resources that are sort of interchangeable currencies that you will need not interchangeable with one another, but they all kind of work the same way in that you need specific currencies to buy specific things, but which currencies you need is, sort of thematic. So for example, in Dwellings you had magic cards, and you needed scrolls typically to buy them, or to cast them if you possessed them. Although there were different sort of kinds of magic cards. You draw them off the deck and find out what you got. The magic cards are also in Andromeda's Edge, but now they're tactics cards, but they're pretty much the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also a wild resource, so there's the 5 resources that you're managing. There's a wild resource, which can be anything, and then there's also the cards, the magic cards and the tactics cards, which are actually another resource, and can be, if you need to spend, for example, 4 resources of any types, you could spend the resources, plus also you could discard cards. And you have maximum hand size. I think it's 5 tactics cards in Andromeda's Edge, or 7 magic cards in Dwellings. So they have somewhat reduced your hand size of personal cards. Now, it's worth noting that in Dwellings, those are distinct from the action cards, which are face up in your tableau. That tableau, and so you're collecting all of these things in order to create dwellings, right? In Dwellings of Eldervale, you're creating dwellings. In Andromeda's Edge, you're creating developments. But they're kind of the same concept in that at some point, one of your workers will transform into a building. And so it's not your worker anymore. It's a building now. And when you create it, it will score you a bunch of points. This is the developments in Andromeda's Edge are a lot more complex. They've got like 3 other things going on. But in Dwellings of Eldervale, when your worker becomes a dwelling, it just gets a little hat on it and it generates a bunch of points based on what's around it. And also it can feel quite different because the dwellings earn points based on the tiles around them and also how many other dwellings are around them. So based on the way the tiles have come out, there may or may not be good scoring point positions for the dwellings in Dwellings of Eldervale in the early game setup. They like to be next to these tiles called ruins, and if there's a cluster of ruins, there could be some good spots in there to build a dwelling because it'll be surrounded by ruins. If the ruins are very spread out, then there won't be those good spots. But later on, as more dwellings are placed on the board to earn the points, then there will be more of these clustered opportunities to get points by building your dwellings. But the dwellings cover up the worker, so when it becomes a building, it is no longer a worker, and you'll have fewer workers to place. You can unlock additional workers, and there's also unique workers. Every faction in Dwellings has a dragon, a wizard, and a fighter. And they're just functionally pieces that can do... They've got higher combat strengths and also a unique power. So there's this sort of geometrical puzzle where you're putting the pieces out on the board, and where you put them down, there's these fundamental 2 kind of spaces, and these both exist in both games. One is it's ruins in Dwellings and alliance bases in Andromeda's Edge, but they're action spots. So you put a worker in there, you get to take an action. There's also in Dwellings the elemental zones, and in Andromeda's Edge, the planets. And when you put a worker in there, you get to take a resource. In Dwellings, it's treasures. They're treasure tokens, they're called. It's treasures. In Andromeda's Edge, it's moons. You take a moon off of the planet, and it's worth resources. And then, just like actually in both games as well, there is a system to place the treasure and the moons into your tableau to power it up. So when you trigger certain cards, you'll also get the benefits of the moon repeatedly. So they're sort of like upgrade tokens that you're investing into future profits. But it's quite a tricky decision because also you can just immediately spend them for the resources shown on them. And if you don't do that, you'll really struggle to get resources. So it's kind of like, which ones do I really set aside to keep? It's an interesting dilemma. And I say it's interesting. It's a very basic dilemma, but it's a good one. And the way it fits into the game is quite good. So you put your workers out in these spaces, and then subsequent turns, you can only place workers adjacent to ones you already have out on the board. So there's this sort of geometric element where now you can only go next to them. So are you going to go collect some resource tokens, or based on how the tiles have been laid out, because they're randomly generated, maybe you can take another big action. Maybe you can't. Who knows? But you need to be thinking about that. So the 3 unique workers get around this restriction. The wizard can teleport anywhere it wants to. the dragon can fly up to 2 spaces away, and the warrior can appear. So the very first worker you put out on the board, when the board is empty of your workers, can go anywhere, provided it's unoccupied. So typically, the most popular action spots usually have someone's worker in them. The warrior can enter a space with workers in it already as their first action.
Grande worker.
Yeah, they're big old fighters. So in Andromeda's Edge, you have the exact same system, except now the warrior is a fighter ship. Your workers in Andromeda's Edge are colony ships, but it's the same thing. In dwellings, they're, I don't know, fantasy peon. But then your so your warriors become a fighter, and your dragon has become a science vessel, and your wizard has become a heavy cruiser. But it's all the same. It's the exact same thing. And so building dwellings and advancing up the tracks is probably the most obvious ways to earn points. The dwellings are scored during the game, and the tracks, in dwellings at least, are scored at the end of the game. I don't think they're scored during. Andromeda's Edge, they are. The big sort of thing that sort of polarized people is after you're done placing your worker, so on your turn you'll just place a worker, there's a few free actions you can do, like play the magic cards or trade in the treasure chests for resources. But at the end of your turn, if there is 2 players' workers in your space, you'll have a scrap, and you'll have to resolve a combat. And everybody who's there will roll dice. And you'll typically get 1 dice per worker, but if you have the wizard or the warrior or the dragon, you'll get more dice. And the way combat works is very simple. Everyone takes their dice, arranges them in descending order, and whoever has the most 6s is the winner. And if they're tied for 6s, then whoever has the most 5s is the winner, and so forth. And I've never seen a true tie. But anyway, so, if you've only got 1 die and your opponent's got 5, there's still a chance you could win if they roll 0 6s and you roll 1. And then everybody who died has to go off to Purgatory, the Underground, the Underworld, and everyone who didn't die gets to stay there, which is just 1 player. And this was in Dwellings, this was the big sort of polarizing game mechanism, right? People didn't like it because the punishment for being in the Underworld is that when you recall your workers, if they come out of the Underworld, they don't get to trigger the tableau. So then they just come straight back to your player area instead. They have to skip over the tableau. Now, there were healing potions in Dwellings that would allow them to move to a section of the Underworld where they could trigger the tableau, I think. And that's also true in Andromeda's Edge. They've kept the exact same system. Now your ships go to the scrapyard, and then you can repair them. And they go to the repair depot, and then they'll come back from the repair. And then I guess the last sort of mechanism of the games that they have in common that I want to talk about are the sort of roving NPCs. In Dwellings, it's monsters. They're tied into the elements. And so there are these different elemental sectors coming out, and occasionally you'll reveal one that's a lair that will get a monster on it. You can go and defeat the monster for glory and points. And if it's Andromeda's Edge, then they're called raiders. But they're not tied into the different tracks anymore. The raiders are kind of their own thing, and you still get rewards for defeating them. And furthermore, if you end your turn adjacent to them, they'll come in and get you. And the game comes with a whole bunch of them, and you can decide which ones you're going to put in at the start of the game. And they may not all appear just based on random chance. But so the raiders still exist and move around the board. That's sort of it for the mechanisms.
I mean, having never played either, they both sound pretty similar.
Yeah, so here's the differences and the similarities. We'll get into that now. So I mentioned already the event track. The event track is a big new addition to Andromeda's Edge. Now, there is a section of the board as well, which contains a number of spaces that are sort of adjacent to the map, and conceptually it's distant planets. And only your science vessel can go in there unless you have the special right to do it some other way. But typically you'll need to get your science vessel, and then it can go into deep space. And deep space has 2 main functions. One is that it gives you better planet tokens. So you'll get some more powerful planet tokens than the ones you would otherwise find around the board. And the second is that you can spy on the event deck. So you'll look at the top 2 event cards, put one back on top and put one on the bottom. And this is how you can influence which track is going to score. Because when that event card is eventually revealed, it will do functionally what it says on the card, and it will score one of those event tracks. And you want it to score a track that you're far up, or at least not one that everyone else is further up than you.
Yep.
Of course, other people can then later visit Deep Space and check out the next 2 cards and swap out the one that you put carefully back, but maybe they won't. Or maybe they'll put back the same card that you put back. Who knows? The event track advances when certain triggers are met. I can't remember exactly where all the triggers are, but they're on action spaces and things like that. So it's sort of by interacting with the game systems, you're going to be advancing this little event token. And then when it gets to the end of the track, which is actually a circular track, when it gets to the end, it's just going to come off, sit in your player area, and at the end of the turn, you're going to resolve the event card. Then it goes back to the start, and it continues to go around. And I believe that if the event deck runs out, the game ends. But typically, and this is actually a big difference, in dwellings, the game ends when all of the tiles are revealed, or when someone's constructed 6 dwellings, which would be the maximum number you can make. You have to unlock 3 workers to do that. In Andromeda's Edge, the game ends when somebody hits a certain amount of in-game points, or during game scoring. So you can set the game to short, medium, and long, which is, I think is 50, 60, and 70, something like that. So 60, I think, is like the middle length. That's what we played with 5 players. But when someone eclipses that threshold, that triggers the final round of play. You finish out the round, and then it's done. So there's also this function of additional tiles appearing, and there's a big change in the games with that as well, because now when the tile positions in Andromeda's Edge are fixed, so that you will, whereas in Dwellings of Eldervale, when you added a new tile to the game, you could attach it to any 2 existing tiles. So they're hexagons, and they just had to match on 2 edges. In Andromeda's Edge, they are still, I think they're hexagons?
Yep.
Yeah. They're still hexagons, they're just funky shapes. They're oblong. But the positions that they'll be in are printed on the board. So when you reveal a new one, you just add it to the next most empty position, and you don't place it. Additionally, they are added during the resolution of the event card. So you'll reveal the event card, it'll do a thing, it'll score a track, it'll add a new tile. And I believe when the event deck is completely empty, that's also an in-game trigger if nobody's reached the prerequisite scoring, although it seems like that would be hard to do given that the cards also give you points. And in Dwellings of Eldervale, the tiles are put out by an action that you take on the board. So it's called Dungeoneering, and it's one of the more desirable actions, because you get to place a new tile and you get 2 adventure cards to add to your tableau, and it does lots of cool stuff. So that's a desirable action on the board there. There's 2 major changes to that tableau. One is that in Dwellings, you would have to trigger certain cards with certain meeples. So like when you were called the dragon, you could activate a dragon card in your tableau. So there was an incentive to keep the dragon out of combat and not just use it as a big hammer all the time. But the big change in Andromeda's Edge is that it no longer cares about which spaceship you use to trigger the cards, but the cards are also built in rows. So you've got like 4 rows in 4 different colors. There's the science row, the industry row, the commerce row, and the culture row. And they're loosely tied into those 4 tracks up at the top of the board, with the other track being supremacy. So the modules are built outwards from the side of your player board. So there are 4 rows. So the modules are just little square cards that go into the rows. And some of them are wild, so they can be put into any rows. There's certain key actions on there as well. So the industry row tends to give you resources and will also allow you to fix ships. And the science row tends to give you resources, but also the big difference is that if you trigger, you just put a ship in the science row and the whole row triggers. So you're sort of building an engine to get resources, which is really important because I don't remember in Dwellings, and I only played it as lower player counts, so this could be a product of Andromeda's Edge being 5, but I also remember certain tiles in dwellings having 2 stacks of treasures in them, whereas I don't remember any planets having 2 stacks of moons on them in Andromeda's Edge. So it feels like there are fewer resources in Andromeda's Edge. Having said that, all the tiles are random. There's way more than you'll see in a single game. I have not seen every tile in Andromeda's Edge. I've not seen every tile in Dwellings, even though I own it. I mean, I've looked at them all, but I've never played with them all. It felt like in Andromeda's Edge, there was a real risk, certainly at 5 players, of running out of moons. And if you hadn't built a decent engine to gain resources in your tableau out of modules, you were actually going to be in real sort of economic trouble, which I suppose is actually counter to the point I made earlier, where it's hard to make bad moves that would really take you out of the game. I think if you got so far into the game that all the moons were consumed or claimed, or the vast majority were, and, a few will come out over the course of the game as new tiles are revealed, but it won't be enough. And if you had not claimed enough resource-producing cards in your tableau, then you would probably hit a real speed bump. Like, it'd be a big issue. Because you need resources to do things. And you'll want to get the modules anyway, because just like the adventure cards, they kind of have this benefit of when you acquire them, they advance you up the matching track on the player board, which gives you more benefits. So there's a little comboing thing there. And then you get to put them into your tableau to advance it. The science row triggers all at once. The industry row and the other 2 rows, you have to trigger by putting a single ship on a single card, and it triggers that card. But the industry row can also have moons placed between cards, so that when you trigger the cards on both sides of the moon, you also get the advantage of the moon. The commerce row just tends to give you the space money, which is the wild resource, which is why it's useful. And then the bottom row, the culture row, that's got the all-important development action on it. Now, you can get development actions in other places too, but you can also do it here. So actually recalling your workers in a specific order could be important, because the development action is just like the dwellings action from Dwellings, where, your worker becomes a building, and then you won't ever recall it. It'll just immediately score points and then live there. In Andromeda's Edge, this is not a big change, because fundamentally it's still the same thing. When you take the development action, one of your pieces on the board becomes a development. But now there's 4 kinds of developments. And there's a system of leaders. You need leaders to build developments on planets. So it's like your leaders are going out and influencing the planets. And this is one of the elements that makes it a more complex game. With Dwellings, they are looking to be next to ruins and other dwellings, and then they score points based on their proximity to those. In Andromeda's Edge, so your faction starts with leaders, which are these little tokens, and you get like 5 of them in your player area, and then the rest are all across the board. They're actually all, I think, most of them are in the Alliance bases. When you build a development, you'll build it on a planet, and then it will look for adjacent leaders, right? So it's not looking at developments, it's looking for adjacent leaders, and it will score points based on that, and maybe some other criteria too. Because in order to build a development, you have to pay a certain number of leaders. And those leaders will go out of the game, and one of them will be inserted into the development. It's like a plastic thing, right? Like in Dwellings, you actually had a little plastic hat that went on top of the wooden meeple, so it looked like a little building. The hat was a roof of a building. In this, and the development, there are 4 types of developments: obelisks, observatories, factories, and spaceports. And they fit onto the colony ship. So the colony ship actually becomes the base of the big model representing the thing that you've built. And the thing that you built will depend on what planet. So if you build it on the green planet, it's an observatory. It gives you science to go up the green track. If it's built on the yellow planet, it's a spaceport. It will give you some wild money and let you go up the commerce track, right? So it's all tied together. But when you fit the big miniature on top of the colony ship, which takes your worker out of the game, you also slot a leader into it as well. And it's quite a nice little production thing as well, because like if you put the leader into the observatory, it becomes the telescope, right? The leader's a little sort of square knick-knack that fits in there and becomes the telescope. If you put it into the top of the factory, it slots into the top of the factory and becomes a chimney. So it's a nice touch. But then it will look around it for leaders. And these will be leaders that people haven't picked up on the board, or leaders that are also inserted into developments. So again, there's a paltry amount of points for building a development next to other developments, but really you want to build them next to clusters of leaders that are still on the board. Because in order to pick up your leaders, you have to play into the space, and then you have to take them back to your player area. And certainly having 5 players meant that there were loads of leaders around in clusters on the board. So you build the development, you go up the associated track, and then you get a development card, which is another new mechanism, which gives you a one-off power that you can use right away or save for later. And then you can flip the card over, and at the end of the game, that card is going to be worth points again based on how far you made it up the associated track. So as you go up those 4 tracks associated with the 4 developments, there are thresholds that increase the value of all of your matching developments. So if you really want to focus on commerce, you want to build a bunch of spaceports and get to the end of the track. The point is the developments have a lot more going on than just than the dwellings did, so that's more complex. And then I think another nice change as well, actually, which is in dwellings, what you could do is you could spend daggers to add dice. And in Andromeda's Edge, you have energy, which you can also spend to add dice. But Andromeda's Edge has this mechanism called targeting, which means that it looks at the number of ships you have, and that becomes your minimum die value. So if you have 2 ships, your targeting is 2. So if you roll any 1s, you can re-roll them. If you have 3 ships, you're targeting 3, so you can re-roll any 1s and 2s. And you can keep re-rolling them until you don't have any of that number left. So it means that you have some more agency over the dice and the dice outputs. Another big difference in Andromeda's Edge, actually, is also the cards for the units. Because all of the units in dwellings were tied into your asymmetrical factions. So you had these asymmetrical factions, and their units would do slightly different things. In Andromeda's Edge, you also have asymmetrical factions, but they just give you a slightly different start and also a unique power and a unique ship. They give you 1 unique ship. Then you also get 1 unique ship card per ship to put into your hand. So you've got these 4 cards at the start of the game. You can play them when you reach certain thresholds on certain tracks. So I think there's one on the supremacy track, but most of them are on the science track. So you hit the science track, certain thresholds, you get to put out these ship upgrade cards that fit into your player board and now give each of your ships like more asymmetrical powers. And some of those cards, for example, gave the ships better targeting. So you could re-roll the dice more. But again, they're randomly given out during setup. I mean, you could probably do a draft with them if you wanted. Maybe there's a variant for that. I don't know. But we just did them randomly. But so that you can develop those asymmetrical powers for the different worker types over the course of the game. So again, another sort of layer of sort of randomization and complexity that's not really present in dwellings. God, yeah, the more I talk about it, the more Terra Mystica and Gaia Project is such an appropriate comparison. I mean, the big difference being that those are very, very sort of straight abstract Euros. And whereas these have a lot more sort of American design sensibilities in them. But as a sort of an overall, like, which one is better? You know, what's better? It's a very apt sort of comparison. Like, you can clearly tell it's the same designers. You can clearly tell that it's sort of the same ideas that have been sort of explored and pushed in different ways. And the second game has a lot more complexity to it. Doesn't necessarily make it better, but just makes it sort of different. And if you like that kind of system, it's probably different enough that you'll get something out of it. But, you know, maybe also different enough that you might want to keep them both if you really like the system. But if you don't like Terra Mystica, you're not going to like Gaia Project. And kind of the same story here. If you don't like Dwellings, you're not going to like Andromeda's Edge.
See.
So I think I'm probably going to wrap it up there, because I could probably get into more nitty-gritty nuance, but I think everyone's kind of probably heard enough about that. If you are getting Andromeda's Edge and you have any more questions, please feel free to post them on the YouTube video or email the podcast at the email address that I haven't created yet. So post them on the YouTube video. I should probably set this up with a podcast email. It'll happen. Or it won't.
One day.
But yeah, I enjoy both. I'm mildly concerned that without an expert in the game guiding us through it, we could have a lot of edge cases and spend a lot of time with our heads down in the rulebook. But I don't think so. I think it flows fairly well. I'll definitely give that another try. I'll probably give it a try at 2 next and see how that works out. And after that, I'll probably no longer have access to the prototype and have to just wait for the bug to show up.
Like us normies.
I think we can call that a day on the podcast, this episode of the
Yeah.
podcast. Do you have anything you'd like to say before we wrap up, Barry?
Sure. Stupor Mundi, which we spoke about 2-3 podcasts ago. They've taken away... People were complaining that the solo game was too easy to get like 80-90 points, and they've taken away like 2 edict tiles or 3 edict tiles from the solo game to make it even shorter. What are these people doing? I need to know.
That's wild.
They're like, oh, it's too easy. I built everything. I got 90 points. I got max points out of my patrons or whatever they are. I was like, what? How? How are you getting more than 3 turns?
Well, we had this discussion earlier, didn't we? Because I tried it solo, and I had a couple of dud games, and then I had one game that went really well, and that was partly because I think purely by absolute chance, based on the random AI cards I drew, I got like 5 rounds, and then I scored like 80 something points, and I was like, great.
I've played it a couple of times since then, and I've never gone more than... I think I've once managed to just squeak into round 4, but it's always been 3 rounds. And I'm like, how are people consistently...
Yeah, I don't think there is... I mean, maybe people are just really, really good at the game, but I don't think that you have any player agency over the AI cards, because the deck resets at random intervals, and the cards it turns over are utterly random. So I don't see how you could affect the game length.
I'm going to have to watch some games back on Board Game Arena and see what people are doing.
Well, we will be fascinated to hear the outcome of your search.
I'll let you know.
In the meantime, the campaign funded, but there'll probably be late pledges at some stage if you are interested in checking that out. But I actually didn't back it in the end.
All right. Well, until next time, thanks for listening.
And thanks to everybody who supports us on Patreon. You all keep the show going, and we really, really appreciate you. That's it for now.
Bye.
See you next time.